This episode of Hellbent for Horror is brought to you by Patreon supporters and listeners like you. If you enjoy Hellbent for Horror, please consider supporting the show by contributing either on our Patreon site or via PayPal. You can find links to both of those on hellbentforhorror.com. And I thank you for helping to sustain the show.
Hi, we're the Saska Sisters, and you're listening to Hellbent for Horror.
Before I start the show, I wanted to say hello to some listeners who reached out to me recently. Listener Hunter Robinson got in touch with me to tell me about his first kiss. Hunter says, "When I was a kid, my parents were very strict about what movies I could watch. Luckily for me, my grandparents could care less about what I could watch. One night, my grandfather asked me if I wanted to watch a scary movie. I said yes, and he put on The Fog. I was 6 years old, and it terrified me. I could not sleep at all, but the next time I went over to my grandparents' house, my grandfather asked me what I wanted to watch, and I said something scary." Hunter, The Fog is a personal favorite of mine, too. I remember nearly killing my friends the day after seeing the movie when we used smoke bombs in a clubhouse to recreate the final scenes. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to my website and click the support button. And if you follow me on Twitter, there's a link to the Patreon site on every episode post I do. And we give you stuff for your support, including your own personal direct play link for the episodes. There is more than one way to support the show, however. If you are a listener who enjoys what we do, I have a favor to ask. Libsyn, the podcast host for Hellbent for Horror, is trying to get demographic information to help my show find the right third-party sponsor. Yay! If you could, please go to survey.libsyn.com/Hellbent for Horror and fill out the short survey. I'll also have a link to the survey on the Hellbent for Horror webpage, which is hellbentforhorror.com. It's a simple way to help out the show, and I thank you in advance. I also want to thank Heidi Honeycutt and the Etheria Film Night staff for a great event, and congratulations to director Bridget Savage Cole for winning the jury prize for her film, Swell. And I just got back from Sinister Creature Con in Stockton, California. I got to meet listener Harold Whitson there, and we had some great conversations around horror. So as you can tell, I've been keeping pretty busy getting the word out about Hellbent for Horror. And that brings me to say that I'm looking for an intern to help with some of the creative marketing that I do on social media. If you're interested, feel free to email me at scott@hellbentforhorror or DM me on Twitter. And now, on with the show. Welcome to part 2 of Shut Up and Watch the Movie. It's my list of films that I think are proof of a horror movie resurgence. This list covers movies made between the years 2013 to 2017, just 4 years, and there were enough in the list to necessitate a 2-part show. Some of the movies in my list are well known, but many of them are ones that need to be discovered. There are very good horror movies out there that don't get the recognition or the promotion they deserve. These movies either surprised me, or were imaginative, or gave me a scare. Some may not be to your liking. From the responses from listeners from part 1, I'm hitting about a 90% favorable. But each movie has a unique voice that made them stand out, warts and all, from the others. One last thing, most of the movies are available through either Netflix or Amazon streaming services. Now, as I make my first pick, I want to talk about a plague that's infected horror movies since 1980. I call it Shining-itis. It's a group of movies that pay homage to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. The problem is that The Shining is a cinematic aberration, a once-in-a-lifetime oddity, deliberately slow pace, static long shots, and a running time of 2 hours and 40 minutes. And somehow, despite all of that, it works. There was just something so damn hypnotic about it. Many movies try to duplicate The Shining's feel, and most of them are just plain boring, even at 90 minutes. They forget the lightning in the bottle that makes The Shining so good. It's that hypnotic state that draws you deeper into the film. It's hard to define, but when you feel that hypnotic state from a movie, you know it. And that brings me to 2015's The Witch, a New England folktale. I think a direct comparison between The Shining and The Witch is appropriate. Both movies place a family in complete isolation against nature and madness. Both movies can be read as psychological or supernatural. Both movies are meticulously shot and deliberately paced, and both movies are completely hypnotic. The Witch follows a deeply religious family who is banished from their Puritan village. The father thinks the Puritans are too liberal, so yeah, he's a piece of work. He and his family head out into the wilderness with all their belongings on a wagon, his wife and their son and 2 fraternal twins and an infant and his teenage daughter Thomason build a homestead at the edge of the woods. What could go wrong, right? Well, first off, the father turns out to be a shitty farmer. The corn rots and they're starving, all alone in the wilderness. Everything unravels when Thomason is playing with her infant brother at the edge of the woods. She covers her eyes to play peekaboo, and when she opens them, the baby is gone, right out from under her. And this seemingly random tragedy crashes headlong into a wall of grief and superstition and religious belief that seals the family's fate. This is a family obsessed with sin and damnation, and they believe their misfortunes are brought to them by evil forces. Are we watching a family slowly go mad at the edge of civilization, letting their delusions run wild? Or is there really evil out there in the woods? Was it a wolf or a witch that took the baby? Does Black Phillip, the creepy horned farm goat, talk to the twins? Or is it just a kid's game? Are illnesses curses in disguise? Are fever hallucinations the devil's tongue? We see the answer soon enough. We see a coven of witches in caves performing unspeakable acts to fly in the moonlit sky. Or do we? Or are we seeing the manifestation of what the family fears is out there? Are there delusions playing out in front of our eyes like an expressionistic nightmare? Because everything we see, or think we see, is part of the lore the children already believe. Is every fairy tale that the family brought with them true? The movie keeps us guessing by immersing us in a hyper-realistic historical vision. It feels authentic and believable, and the woods feel like real woods. This allows the movie to weave a hypnotic spell. You might forget the modern world for a world full of superstition and primal fear. It isn't until the final moments of the film that we find out what is real and what is not. Or do we? I highly recommend The Witch. Now, when this next movie premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, people either booed it or gave it a standing ovation. And in all honesty, I think it will do the same with my listeners. It's The Neon Demon from 2016. Now, not all movies are intended to be read like a book. Some movies are meant to be felt, to be experienced. The plot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not the experience of watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it's the same with The Neon Demon. The plot follows a young model who runs off to Los Angeles to find fame. Her natural beauty and innocence draws the attention of jaded photographers. It also draws the attention and the jealousy of the older models in the agency. And that kind of attention can be deadly. On the surface, the plot sounds like a ripoff of All About Eve, but that is not the experience of The Neon Demon. We are going to feel everything that we see until we have a hypnotic sensory overload. The movie is blood and black lace mixed with Suspiria, mixed with liquid sky. The movie opens with a gorgeous model in a stunning dress lying on an antique sofa. It looks very Vogue, except for her slashed throat and the blood running down her arm. Of course, it's an illusion for a fetishistic glamour photo shoot. This movie is all about illusion and artifice and the artificiality of glamour and the temporary power of beauty. But it is also about worshiping false idols and rituals and sacrifices. Our young model fascinates the top photographers because her beauty is completely natural, virginal. She stands out because every other model we meet has had cosmetic surgery to their bodies. And once you cut away a part of yourself, you lose your innocence, something no surgery can correct. Our young model gets a showcase role at a prestigious fashion show, and with that, the ritual begins. Is she transforming into the new virgin queen, or is she the new virgin sacrifice? The surface beauty of abstract visuals cannot hide the sense of menace underneath. And once the ritual begins, the movie becomes a surreal nightmare. And in the end, I think you'll be shocked to see how far the movie decides to take this, whether you boo or you applaud it. The Neon Demon makes my list because it walks the razor's edge of horrible beautiful. The next movie, made in 2014, is a great double feature with The Neon Demon. Even though this movie is much more low budget and it got very little promotion, I think it's the better movie of the two. The movie is Starry Eyes, and even though it's similar to The Neon Demon, the way it tells the story is completely different. This movie owes more to Roman Polanski than Stanley Kubrick. Starry Eyes follows Sarah, an anonymous actress, through her version of Los Angeles. It's an LA where fledgling movie directors live in abandoned vans, and where waitressing jobs are considered showbiz by the manager, and competition is just as harsh. Sarah lives in a rundown motel with a group of wannabe artists who are also wannabe friends. She endures her friends more than she likes them. Sarah gets an audition for a horror film called The Silver Scream. It is being made by a small but well-regarded film studio named Astraeus Films. At the audition, she meets the casting director from hell and his assistant. They sit there expressionless and barely speak to her. To say the least, the audition goes poorly, and Sarah runs into the ladies' room. And when she gets there, she punishes herself by violently pulling her hair until her neck vertebrae crack. The casting assistant walks in and sees this happen, and she is very intrigued. She offers a second audition if Sarah will go to that emotion that made her punish herself. They want to see the real Sarah. Even though she feels vulnerable and ashamed, Sarah agrees. And when she channels that angry animal again, she goes so far that she convulses on the floor. And they are pleased. And Sarah gets a call back for a screen test in a pitch black room. And then a bright light starts to rhythmically flash. And then things start to get weird and violent. What makes Starry Eyes so good is that it is a fleshed out character study as well. And this is where the movie goes into Polanski territory, because Polanski created characters that may look friendly but carried evil deep inside of them. And Starry Eyes explores the evil shadow that we all have inside. Starry Eyes says that we are only as nice and as kind as we need to be. But if our options were to change, and that evil shadow is permitted to come out, we will allow it to come out. Because it's easy to become possessed when the demon has been inside of you all along. I highly recommend Starry Eyes. There are a few directors whose styles are popular to emulate right now. There's Kubrick and Carpenter and Cronenberg and even Fulci. But nobody, and I mean nobody, emulates Brian De Palma. He is the crazy hit-and-miss genius who gave us Sisters and Carrie and Dress to Kill and Body Double. De Palma was an American Hitchcock who wasn't afraid to be called a pervert. His movie started where Hitchcock would slam on his brakes. But De Palma's perversion wasn't just sexual. He relished in the perversion of the twisted soul, the deviant lengths one would go for revenge. And that brings me to the 2013 film Proxy, which is the best Brian De Palma film not made by Brian De Palma. We see a very pregnant woman walking down the street after having a prenatal exam. And suddenly, someone in a red hoodie jumps out from around a corner and hits her on the head with a brick. The attacker drags her unconscious body into the alley. And then, the attacker uses the brick to strike her on the belly again and again and again. This moment is shocking and hard to forget, and we are left asking the question, why? The baby does not survive, and the woman, named Esther, joins a hospital support group. Esther meets and befriends Melanie, whose husband and son were killed by a drunk driver. These lonely women bond over their tragedies. And then, Esther's at a department store, and she sees Melanie and walks over to say hello. But before she gets there, Melanie starts to change. She starts screaming that someone has taken her boy, and chaos ensues. The security guards try to calm her down, and they scramble to find this lost boy. Melanie runs for the parking lot, and Esther chases after her, only to see Melanie change again. Melanie calmly walks over to an SUV, and she pulls out a little boy. She pinches him to make him cry, and then she carries him into the mall. Esther is stunned, and then she smiles. You will be asking why again and again as this crazy puzzle box of a movie unfolds. And that's all I'm going to tell you. Suffice to say that this is just the tip of the insanely perverse iceberg that is Proxy. This movie starts Hitchcockian, but by the end we are in pure De Palma horror mode. And you might find yourself rewatching that opening scene with a different pair of eyes, right after you pick your jaw off the floor. I recommend Proxy, and I also say it's high time for a Brian De Palma revival. If you would have told me back in 1984 that there would come a day when I'd be sick of zombies, I would have laughed at you. And yet, here we are in 2017, and zombie fatigue is real. So imagine my surprise when I found not one, but two zombie movies on my list. The first one is South Korea's Train to Busan from 2016. It's not only a good horror movie, it's also a good disaster movie, one of my favorite things from the 70s. But it's also a social commentary and an unexpectedly moving story about family. A little girl asks her workaholic divorcee father to take her to Busan for her birthday so she can see her mother. He's reluctant because of his work and his relationship with his ex-wife, but he decides to take his daughter there by way of bullet train. On the way to the train station, we hear about riots in the streets, and we see fire trucks and a burning building. The father and the daughter finally do get on the train, but so does a young girl with a bite on her leg. And although this sounds like a standard setup, where this movie goes with this simple idea is pretty smart and really exhilarating. There's plenty of violence, but the movie also makes room for acts of heroism and bravery, as well as people at their absolute worst. And that makes this movie more about the humans than it is the zombies. If you like wild action sequences with your horror, I recommend Train to Busan. The next movie opens with a young girl lying in bed in a prison cell, counting to herself. She hears her prison guards coming, so she sits herself in a wheelchair that's by the bed. When the cell door opens, she is all smiles and welcomes her jailers by name. They welcome her with machine guns pointed at her head, and they call her an abortion. She continues to smile pleasantly as they strap her head and extremities into the chair. When the soldiers take her out of the cell, they join a convoy of other children in wheelchairs. They are brought to a classroom where they stay strapped in those chairs. Melanie, the girl from the cell, is the star pupil in this weird classroom. She tells a story to her teacher, who absent-mindedly pats Melanie on the head, and the soldiers pour into the classroom, locked and loaded. The sergeant reminds the teacher that these may look like children, but they are not children. He decides to remind her of what they are. He spits on his forearm to remove a scent-covering gel, and he puts his arm in front of a boy. The boy looks at him innocently, and then the boy gags. And then his jaw muscles crack. And then he is a crazed beast, hissing and snapping his jaws uncontrollably. And then all the other children around him start to go wild too. It's like some crazy chain reaction. What are they? Welcome to 2016's The Girl with All the Gifts. This movie is about a human outbreak of the very real zombie fungus that's found in insects. It has mutated and jumped species, and it is now out of control. The infected are mindless zombies who spread the disease one bite at a time. But Melanie and these other kids aren't mindless at all. They are polite and capable of conversation until they smell your warm flesh. So what are these children? The scientists don't have a term for it, except that they are second-generation carriers of this illness. These children still interact with their environment, and yet they are no longer human. They have the fungus inside them, and they will instinctively kill you if they are triggered. See, they are perfect mimics, and they aim to please you and get you to empathize with them, all the better to infiltrate you. Is every human attribute that Melanie has just camouflage for a dangerous mutation? Or is there more to this mutation than meets the eye? This question goes from academic to horribly practical as the military base gets overrun and a small band of people escapes with Melanie in tow. There are more revelations and mutations to be found in The Girl with All the Gifts. But most of all, it adds an intelligent and moving discussion on what makes something alive and what makes us human. I highly recommend The Girl with All the Gifts. A family goes on a day trip to the Tijuana countryside. The kids, a preteen brother and sister, ask their parents if they can explore the caves in a nearby hill. The mother agrees, but they need to be back in an hour and a half because it is getting late. She gives them her watch, and they climb the hill. They do not return. The parents are in a panic as darkness falls. A full-scale search is impossible until morning, so the police tell the parents they should try and rest. The next morning, the parents wake up to find out the police have found the children. They simply walked out of the hills. They are returned to the parents, but the children are different. They are withdrawn, and they act strangely, and they only spend time with each other. The parents fear the worst, that their children were abused by someone in the hills. The children don't remember anything except waking up in a cave. But strange things start happening, things that can't easily be explained away. And the parents hear about a local legend about those hills, that there is an evil up there. And that's the spine of the story to 2013's Here Comes the Devil. But what makes this movie so creepy is the meat surrounding the bone. The movie is drenched in sexuality and the dread of sexuality when it comes to children. The events of the movie start with the daughter having her first period. After that, the mother sees predators in every gas station. It is creepy. The movie exploits the anxiety the parents have when their children hit puberty, when the kids transform into something different and out of their control. Whatever these children are transforming into brings with it some nightmarish imagery and possible visits from a demon and murder and torture. Oh, and I can't forget that there's a madman with a machete who cuts off women's fingers and keeps them in a box. Yeah, and that's just some of the madness in this movie. I recommend Here Comes the Devil for creeping me out and creating a sense of dread that feels like a fever dream. Sometimes it's the simple ideas that can catch you off guard. You think you know what you're in for, but even an obvious premise can blindside you when it's in the hands of an artist or the hands of a maniac. I think we're closer to maniac country with a Belgian horror movie, Cub, from 2014. The premise is as old as the campfire tale that's told in the film itself. A group of Cub Scouts camp out in the woods, and the counselors tell a campfire story. It's about a werewolf who stalks the very same woods they're camping in. And the story turns out to be true. Well, kind of true. The reality is much more twisted than a werewolf, but it is just as feral and dangerous. As the Cub Scouts try to escape whatever this beast is, they stumble upon another horror. The woods are covered with hidden, deadly traps. This is a perverse little nightmare of a film. A lot of movies put kids in peril, but very few of them go very far with that. And if they do, the kids are usually teenagers. This movie uses 12-year-old boys that look like 12-year-old boys. And when the carnage happens, and the body count rises, and you realize the director is committed to going all the way, and you will know the scene when you see it, holy shit. Cub makes the list not only because of the size of its balls, but because it shocked me. It made me acknowledge the brutality on the screen, and it made me realize that I often detach myself from the carnage I see in movies, and I don't let it sink in. Cub from 2014 removed those filters from me. Recommended, but know what you're getting into. A mother and her young daughter are driving on an isolated highway in the rain. Suddenly, a wolf runs in front of the car and they hit it. When the mother gets out to look at the damage and call AAA for a tow, she realizes that the wounds on this wolf were not caused by her car. This wolf was attacked by something much bigger, something out there in the dark. She can't see where it is, but she can hear it growl. The mother runs back into the car, and the car won't start. They are trapped. And that is the entire plot of The Monster from 2016. I can hear you. You mean that's it? You're kidding. I know. Even the name is generic. The Monster, right? And yet, this movie makes my list because it is a masterclass in suspense. It knows exactly what tone to hit, and it understands the fine art of knowing what to show and when to show it. With one location, two main characters, and 80% of the movie shot inside a car, this movie uses those limitations to twist the thumbscrews on you. And to tell you any more is to ruin the beautiful suspense that's been created for you. If you love monster movies, I highly recommend The Monster from 2016. Let's go to another type of monster in another type of monster movie. The movie's name is I Am Not a Serial Killer from 2016. The story follows a teenage boy named John who lives in a small Midwestern town. John is diagnosed as a sociopath who also suffers from homicidal impulses. He curbs his impulses with mental exercises and rules and constant visits with his therapist. He also works in his mother's funeral home, which satisfies his morbid curiosity. And then there is a violent murder with mutilation. It happens in town. Of course, Mom and the therapist need to ask the tough question, and John answers that no, he did not do this. But he is fascinated with the body and the crime scene. And then there is another brutal murder and mutilation. And this starts talk of this being the work of an active serial killer. John is pretty sure he didn't do this. And then John starts to see a drifter around town. And that's where I'm going to stop. See, I've only covered stuff that the name already spells out. And this is a movie that is best when you don't know what's coming. And believe me, you don't know what's coming. I will say that I was completely caught off guard, and the audacity of the movie made me laugh. But it's the pathos under the audaciousness that makes I Am Not a Serial Killer a must-see. Highly recommended. I Am Not a Serial Killer was the first American film by Irish director Billy O'Brien, who directed a great low-budget horror film called Isolation back in 2005. There have been a string of very good horror films coming out of Ireland for the last decade or so, and a few of them make this list. In the 2014 movie The Canal, Dublin is an ancient city that has ghosts on every corner. Most of them are connected to a location, but they are dormant because they are forgotten. But they can be awoken with nothing more than a memory. The problem is, you don't know what you just woke up until it's too late. The movie follows David, a film archivist who lives in Dublin with his wife and his son. David suspects his wife is having an affair, and he is slowly coming apart at the seams. While at work, he reviews some archival footage of a brutal murder that happened in 1902. He recognizes the house where the murder happened. It's his house. Things get complicated when David follows his wife to her lover's home. His first impulse is to kill them. But he comes to his senses and, instead, walks the nearby canal to cool off. And that's when he hears the voice. It's coming from a public bathroom off the canal, a scary place you wouldn't go in alone. But David is compelled to go in there. When he goes inside, there's nobody there. And then he is suddenly violently ill, and he starts to pass out. Right before he does, he swears he sees his wife standing in the doorway, and she's being strangled by a shadowy figure. David's wife is found drowned in the canal. And what follows is either a descent into madness or old ghosts being awakened by another violent death in their territory. If you like horror films that straddle the line between psychological and supernatural horror, watch The Canal. The next movie is a breathtaking psychological horror film that's so immersive you can smell the sweat of the main characters. It is 2013's In Fear, another Irish film that is as experimental as it is simple. This is such a weird little movie, and I don't know what to tell you about it. It's the story of an English couple who come to Ireland for a music festival, and they get lost on their way to their bed and breakfast. And things go horribly wrong. It's two people driving around, lost, and the sun is going down. And what else can I tell you that won't give anything away? I can say that after I saw it, it felt so authentic that I immediately looked up how it was filmed. And I can't talk about that because it might give things away that you need to experience. If you intend to watch In Fear, don't read anything about it until after you see it. Hey, you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. And if you love it, you'll probably be as curious as I was to find out some stuff. And if you hate it, well, I was averaging 90% positive responses in episode 1. I can say it is intense, and it is claustrophobic, and it is bizarre. And In Fear is one of my favorites on this list, and it earned its place here. So, 2 whole shows, and there's still movies on my list. So, let's go into a lightning round. If you like psychological horror films that keep you questioning fact from fiction, I recommend 2 great ultra-low budget films. There's 2015's Pod, where 2 siblings try to do an intervention on their unstable Army veteran brother who has barricaded himself in the family cabin. He believes the military experimented on him, and they have been monitoring him. He has removed several of his teeth, where he was sure they put the tracking device. He's on alert now because the military has sent a pod assassin, a hybrid creature, to kill him. He can prove it because he has the creature locked in the basement. What's in the basement? Watch Pod and find out. And then there's They Look Like People from 2016. A chance encounter in New York City reunites 2 childhood friends, Christian, who is living comfortably in the city, and Wyatt, who is transient. Christian invites Wyatt to stay with him, but he's unaware that Wyatt is there with a sinister purpose. Wyatt believes that the people he loves are turning into evil creatures, and nobody else sees it. Wyatt is there to find out if Christian can be saved or not. What happens? Watch They Look Like People to find out. Now, if you like movies about cults, try these 2 movies, 2016's The Veil and 2013's Ritual. In The Veil, the sole survivor of a suicide cult returns to the abandoned religious compound with a documentary crew on the 25th anniversary of the massacre. Little does the survivor know that the documentarians found never recovered footage that was hidden on the compound, and they want her to watch it and comment on it live. When they watch the film, it doesn't take long to realize it was meant to be found by them. What's on the film? Watch The Veil, and make sure you watch it to the very end. Hint, hint. Now, if you want to see something raw and creepy and nihilistic, Ritual is the movie for you. A man gets a hysterical late-night phone call from his estranged wife. She is in a motel where she has just killed a man who was trying to kidnap her, and she needs his help. That's a hell of a phone call. The ex-husband drives to the motel, sees the body, and he decides to put the body in the dead man's trunk. When he opens the trunk, he finds a portable kill room and a camcorder. They take the camera into the motel room and they watch the tape. And on the tape, is a woman being murdered in a satanic ritual. And then there's a loud knock on the motel room door. For a dose of cinema verite nastiness, watch Ritual. Now, sometimes a movie is so well made and so true to its convictions that you must applaud it for succeeding at its intentions, even though its intentions were to throw you into a black pit of despair. Well, for those of you who want to take a walk on the dire side, I recommend 2014's Under the Skin and 2016's The Eyes of My Mother. It's not that these movies are so hardcore and gore. It's that there are scenes that are so tragic and so horrible and so pitiful. If you think about them too long, they hurt your soul. In Under the Skin, an alien disguised as a beautiful woman seduces lonely men in Scotland. When she takes them home, the room starts to absorb them like they are in a black quicksand. It's a Venus flytrap, and this is how she eats. This movie is so unsettling because it's told from the emotionless point of view of the alien. She watches a couple accidentally drown on a beach and ignores a crying baby they left behind. The victims she lures home are only guilty of being lonely and sad and desperate for touch. Some of the men are disfigured, and they react like stray dogs when she touches them. Their vulnerability in their last moments is heartbreaking. And yet, the movie is so haunting and so hypnotic and so beautiful. But Under the Skin doesn't hold a candle to the horrible despair at the center of The Eyes of My Mother. I disliked this movie when I first saw it, even though it takes the kind of risks I usually applaud. The movie hit me as so cold and cruel and so full of a painful loneliness, it repelled me. It was only because of other horror fans whose opinions I respect that I gave it another watch. And now, it's on my list because it is so fiercely unique and so effective. What's it about? All I'll say is that it's about a very, very lonely girl. With very little gore, it takes torture, both physical and mental, to an existential level. Watch The Eyes of My Mother, but go into it unarmed as intended. And after a double bill of bad vibes, let's end with some good old-fashioned 80s style fun. Monsters and gore! Monsters and gore! I really enjoyed 2016's Beyond the Gates, a spot-on homage to the days of the video store. And it revives a forgotten fad, the video board game. Yes, we used to play board games that used a videotape on your TV as part of the game, and yes, it was as clumsy as it sounds. Here's the movie in 5 words. Evil, killer, video, board game. Really, does anything else have to be said? Roll the dice and watch Beyond the Gates, a movie that wears its 80s cheesiness like a badge of honor. I hope I made your Netflix queue a little bigger with this episode, because I do believe there's a horror resurgence happening, and it is happening under the radar in small independent films, like it always does. There will always be the odd movie that breaks into the mainstream, but that's always temporary. The new classics are going to be picked by us through word of mouth. But before I close, let me leave you with one more movie. Just one more story before midnight, just to keep us warm. It's another movie from Ireland, the land of the old religions and druids and fairy mounds. A woman rents a country estate for 6 months with the purpose of performing a ritual. She needs to contact her son, who was killed by a group of teenagers performing satanic rites. She hires an occultist to perform the ritual, and the two of them will live alone there for 6 months, and they cannot leave until the ritual is completed. Why 6 months? That's how long it will take to open the veil, find the dead, and convince them to speak to you, if you're lucky. And it's that kind of commitment to the movie's universe that makes 2017's A Dark Song so mesmerizing. I have no idea what you'd need to do to speak to the dead, but my instincts tell me it takes more than knocking 3 times on a special door and leaving a plate of the loved one's favorite cheese to do it. In this film, the entire house is a ritual altar, and each room has a symbolic purpose. They painstakingly circle the house with a line of salt, and that locks themselves inside. And to cross that salt line before the ritual is over is to risk death or worse. Is this authentic stuff? I have no clue, but I will say that the amount of detail makes you suspend disbelief. In most horror movies, the ritual is a plot point to get to the ghosts, but this movie is all about the ritual, or the rituals within rituals. We have 2 broken people trapped inside their own personal rituals. The rituals of addiction, and the rituals of grief, and the rituals of abuse. Are they driving each other mad, or is everything that is happening all proof that the ritual is working? What lengths would you need to go to get the attention of the dead? And once you get it, can you turn it off? Well, there's only one way to find out. Shut up and watch the movie. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lee Sigorsky. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. You can find Hellbent for Horror on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher, and other podcast platforms. And H4H has its own app. You can download it from the Google or Amazon store for Android, and as of the week of March 20th, it will be available on the iTunes store. Until next time, stay hell-bent.